It's a Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and we are ready and revving for Grizzlies Rockets tonight. But before we get there, the Grizzlies had practice yesterday. Our Damichael Cole was there in the flesh, talking about injury updates. Morant, Santi Aldama, close to a return. Plus, some pretty high-level hoops were played on Wednesday night. The Cleveland Cavaliers, the Oklahoma City Thunder, a tier above Memphis, I would say, at this stage. What can the Grizzlies do to get to that place? We'll talk about that and more on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to a Thursday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. It is I, Joe Mullinax, joined by my co-host, Damichael Cole, Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. We are so glad that you are with us wherever you are taking in the show. Hopefully you're an everydayer each and every time an episode drops. You're hanging out with Damichael and I here on Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. We are free and available wherever you get podcasts. As proud members of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every single day. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Make Damichael Cole and myself part of your Memphis Grizzlies and NBA content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. And friendly reminder, free daily newsletter, lockedondaily.com. Make sure you're going and subscribing, checking out free words from me on the Memphis Grizzlies. I would argue, I've said this before, it's a bit of a hot take. Very few people have written more about the Memphis Grizzlies over the last decade than me. Each and every time a newsletter drops, you can get my words on the Grizzlies for free. LockedOnDaily.com, free daily newsletter. Make sure you're subscribing there, of course. Damichael, you write plenty of words. You rightfully so, a little bit more professionally recognized for the great work you do. Award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal. Important to remind everyone of that every once in a while. As part of your beat writer duties, you go to practice. The Grizzlies practiced on Wednesday. And coming out of that Wednesday practice, a lot of good news, surprisingly good news, in my opinion. Some Grizzlies returning relatively soon if things hold true the way that Memphis usually uses the injury report.
Yeah, you got Santi Aldama and Morant both closing in on potential returns for the Grizzlies. Both upgraded to questionable on the latest injury report. Desmond Bane is upgraded to questionable as well. I think he missed the last game. And then, of course, Jaren Jackson Jr. is also on there. Look, Jaren's been a workhorse this year. If there's anybody, it's okay if he misses a game, it's Jaren. But that's not to say that he will. But I'm just pointing out the fact that he is on the injury report. He hasn't been on there much this season since the beginning of the season. But yeah, speaking on Ja and Santi, I think with Ja in particular, this is great news, right? One, because it's timely. We talked about how the schedule is ramping up. You played a Dallas team that was shorthanded, and the Grizzlies were shorthanded. So that one felt a little more even. This Houston game wouldn't be too even without Morant on the floor. Houston, we'll talk a lot about them as we get to the third segment. But this is a game that you kind of feel like, one, you want to have Ja. And not just for this game, but for this stretch coming up, because after Houston, you got Minnesota. And then you get Houston again, and then you got San Antonio twice. All teams who are competitive, all teams who are a 500 record or better. And just at the end of the day, it's just big for Ja. I think right now he can't miss any more games, or he won't be eligible for any of the All NBA stuff or postseason awards, which I doubt he really cares much about, knowing Ja. But at the same time, just pointing that out. But overall, this is huge for the Grizzlies from the standpoint of, right, we talk about the number 2 seed in the West. I think, with Houston and the Grizzlies, if you look at the standings, OKC, there's a big gap, and Joe will talk about this a little bit more later. But if you just look at the numerical numbers in the standings record-wise, there's a big gap between OKC and the 2 and the 3 spots. Then after the 2 and 3 spots, have you noticed, Joe, it's not a huge cushion, but it's a cushion where the Grizzlies and or Rockets could afford to lose a couple games before teams behind them really make up some ground. So there's a little bit of a cushion there. So basically, it's the Rockets and the Grizzlies right now, and the fact that you're about to see them in 2 of your next 3 games, it's timely to get Ja back. But yeah, Santi as well. This is a guy me and you have talked about as a 6th man of the year candidate right now. You look at the bench, it doesn't have the same pop without Santi right now. It's kind of obvious, and it's not even just the scoring. I think our guy Parker Fleming, pointed it out as well. It's not just the scoring you miss with Santi. It's the playmaking. It's the ability to, dribble, drive, touch the paint, kick it out to scores, things like that. He's a guy who is really good at those things. So he's not even just good at scoring for himself, but he's good at creating for his teammates. So you getting Ja back on the floor, in addition, of course, to Desmond Bane, that bodes well for the Grizzlies going forward.
Santi Aldama is a major piece to this puzzle, right? And we'll talk more about trades and stuff here in a moment, ways for Memphis to try to get to OKC and to a lesser extent Cleveland's level. It's hard to respect the Eastern Conference too much. But again, high-level hoops happened on Wednesday night between the Cavaliers and the Thunder. You got to tip your cap to Cleveland as well. We'll talk about that in a second. What are the gifts of a Jimmy Butler trade not happening for the Grizzlies? One of the positives of, even if they did go and get a Brandon Ingram, which I thought that was your idea, by the way. People are a lot more mad about Brandon Ingram than I thought they would be. But whatever. People are going to hate. Half of people are going to like stuff, and half of people are going to hate stuff.
You know what I've come to learn, Joe? If everyone says, "Oh, go get me this player, go get me that player," instead of you, this is what you should start doing, Joe. Instead of you drawing up the trades, tell them, "Okay, give me your trade proposal. You want the Grizzlies to go get Zach LaVine? Tell me what you propose." And then when you hear their proposals, look. Joe Monet calls himself the armchair GM. I got to give my guy his flowers here. He's really good at drawing up some of these ideas. They look real realistic when you draw them up. I'm just saying that because a lot of these people they're gonna draw up some of these things, and I mean it won't make much sense. So I mean, whatever.
Well, I appreciate that. The first person through the wall usually has the arrows in their back, right? A wise man or person once said that. So I have lots of arrows in my back over the last decade when it comes to armchair GMing. But anyway, my point is, one of the positives of that potentially not happening is Santi Aldama being re-signed. I think he's going to be a restricted free agent, right?
Yes,
so that allows for Memphis to match offers. There's wiggle room for them to keep Santi. Jake LaRavia, it's going to be much more difficult for the Memphis Grizzlies to hold on to him. So I'm intrigued by Santi continuing that 6th man of the year campaign. How much does his value go up, whether it's a future trade, whether it's just sticking in Memphis? A 6'11" dude that can score off the dribble, hit some threes, there's a lot of value there, obviously. And I do think him anchoring that bench, especially as the team gets healthy, it'd be great to see that more solidly as we try to get as much data as possible on what the Memphis Grizzlies actually are before the trade deadline. Santi's a huge piece of that.
He's a big piece. I mean, again, he is a guy who is one of the front runners for 6th man of the year right now. It's a different pop off the bench when Santi's playing. I think it's very visible. It's visible with the front court rotations. You look at the way the Jaren's being used. When Santi's available as opposed to when Santi's not available. There are differences there. And just with the lineup combinations, like we just saw a game, a couple games ago where we saw, it was the last game. We saw BC and Zach Edey in the lineup together pretty much for the first time. And some of that is because, you haven't had a guy like Santi available or whatever the case may be. But Santi's ability to play, even the 3 in stretches, the 4, and he's gotten stronger. He can go to the 5 whenever the team needs him to. He's one of the more versatile players on the team. And, we'll see what that means long term because they kind of got another guy in the waiting who can, play the 3, can play the 4. And 20-year-old guy, Joe, he really good too. Really good player.
Put on 20 pounds of muscle, apparently.
He put on some muscle. So, they got a bunch of guys here, and we'll be talking about that guy that we're referring to here next in the next few days a lot more. But as it goes for Santi and Ja, 2 huge pieces of the puzzles that are coming back pretty much at the right time in order for this team to compete with those top level teams. They've struggled against those teams, Joe. They've struggled against top competition this season. But you know what? They haven't really had a fair shake in a lot of those games. So this will be a good test.
Do they need a trade or not? Right. That's one of the things that we're going to talk about here coming up next on Locked On Grizzlies. How Memphis gets to the tier of an OKC, of a Cleveland, of a Boston, the defending champions. That's a major question. But let Damichael and I know in the comments. Hit us up on X at Damichael C for Damichael, at Joe Mullinax for me. How excited are you about Ja Morant, Santi Aldama being back in the fold? How do you foresee that playing out? Do you think Ja cares about the all-NBA stuff? I'm with Damichael. He has his contract. I'm not so sure he's so concerned about that. Plus, Ja is very comfortable with himself. One of the credits I'll give him, one of the pros, and I mean this as a compliment, very comfortable in his own skin. So I don't think he needs the affirmation of anybody else to tell him how important he is to the Memphis Grizzlies. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, how Memphis can make the jump to true contender. We'll talk about that next. Stick around. This episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Gametime. I love going to live events, sports, music, theater, comedy. One of my favorite memories of 2024 was attending WrestleMania 40. I had a blast. The energy, the excitement was unforgettable in Philadelphia at Damichael's old stomping grounds. Now, Gametime has made it even easier to get tickets for your favorite events with their new feature, Gametime Picks. This feature filters out the fluff to show you the only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You can use Gametime Picks, finding those deals, plus you can see the view from your seat before buying. You can have great prices and amazing seats, plus the app's all-in pricing shows the total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by Rocket RX. If you're ready to boost your confidence and take control in the bedroom, Rocket RX has the solution. Imagine feeling more prepared and performing at your best. Rocket RX makes it simple and stress-free. Rocket RX offers FDA-approved treatments for ED at a lower cost than branded alternatives. No more uncomfortable doctor visits or pharmacy trips. Everything is delivered straight to your door in discreet, plain packaging. With Rocket RX, you'll get trusted care from a real U.S. clinical team, complete a quick 100% online consultation, and you can get your free prescription today. Visit rocketrx.com to get started now. It takes literally 2 minutes. Right now, our listeners can get 40% off your first order when you use the code LOCKEDONNBA. That's rocketrx.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for 40% off your first order. Terms and conditions apply. Rocket RX, better sex made simple. You know, it's not simple, Damichael Cole, winning an NBA championship. That is very difficult. Something that literally every season 30 teams strive to do. Only one pulls it out at the end. How do the Grizzlies get to that tier of true contender? Because that's been a major talking point surrounding the Jimmy Butler conversation. In my opinion, Jimmy Butler would have made the Memphis Grizzlies a true contender. They're in the mix for the 2 seed in the Western Conference, but we've seen that before, right? We've seen the Grizzlies be the number 2 seed, and they haven't been able to be a true contender in the eyes of many. Back then, understandably so to an extent, even a team like the Lakers would have been considered a contender in front of Memphis. This season, it's Oklahoma City. It's Cleveland. The amazing game that they played on Wednesday night. High-level hoops. Is it as simple as the Grizzlies needing to be healthy? Is there a trade, in your opinion? Is it internal improvement? We talk a lot about turnovers. We talk a lot about perimeter defense. Is it scheme adjustments? What, to you, Damichael Cole, do the Memphis Grizzlies need to do, either internally, externally, or both, to really call themselves a true championship contender here in 2025?
I'll go with the simple and easier internal route first, because you can name several different type of players. Oh, if they bring this guy in, that'll put them over the hump or whatever the case may be. I'll make it simple because at the end of the day, it's going to be hard to acquire any of those guys. But in my opinion, you don't need to acquire any of those guys to get to that top tier. You need to find the right combinations, and you need a certain level of development from 2 key guys, in my opinion. And it just what sucks probably about this season so far is those 2 guys, in my opinion, are the ones who've been hurt: Vince Williams and Gigi Jackson. When you talk about outside of your core, and you might have them in your core, but we talk about the core three. That's the climbing. That's
the three that the world revolve around.
Exactly.
Bane, Morant, and Jackson Jr.
When you go outside of those three, there's a next three players to me that kind of really hold the keys to some things. Zach Edey, because of his offensive rebounding, because of his defensive rebounding, his physicality, all things hallmarks in Taylor Jenkins' system and things needed to get this Grizzlies team to the next step. It's something they struggled against the Lakers, so forth. Two other guys in particular for me, Vince Williams, GG Jackson. Here's why. This is not to say, because Jalen Wells is huge. He's very important. Santi Aldama, extremely important, right? I want to be very clear with that. But we're talking about a championship top-tier contender. Who do you need to be those type of players? Here's why Vince Williams. When you think about the starting lineup, the starting lineup, Joe, that we think will be the eventual starting lineup that gets this team into championship contention or whatever the case may be, the four spots that you know are Ja, Des, Jaren Jackson Jr., Zach Edey. You're going to need those four on the floor together, right? Now, that fifth spot, if we want to break it down and get into what is the ideal player at that fifth spot, three things stand out to me as to the perfect player that fits in between Ja, Des, Jaren, and Zach Edey. It's one, a player that can knock down some three-point shots. Two, a player that can defend at a high level. Three, a player that at least, average to above average playmaker. Well, you look at every option that you got on this roster. You look at Jake LaRavia, Jalen Wells, Vince Williams. If you go down the list, Marcus Smart included, only one guy to me fills all three of those. It's Vince Williams. Last season, Vince Williams, when he got to play, you talk about blessing in disguise. When he got to play those extra minutes, he got to play on the ball a little bit more. We saw the playmaking ability that he had, where he had all those stretches of games with at least 10 points, 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and he was stacking those games up. And, the teammates were talking about him when he was about to come back this season. Like, he's a good playmaker for us. With Jalen Wells, you get the shooting in the defense. Right now, he's averaging under 2 assists per game. With Jake LaRavia, you get really good shooting, right? You get some of that playmaking as well. He's a decent defender, but I would not put him in the same level of defensive ability as guys like Jalen Wells and Vince Williams. With Marcus Smart, you can put him in that conversation defensively. You're going to get the playmaking, but you won't get the efficient shooting to that level. So Vince Williams is the one guy on this team who can fit in that starting spot. Even if you want to throw GG Jackson in that conversation, GG Jackson, you're going to get a lot of things there, but you said as much as anyone, the playmaking aspect to GG Jackson, that is still developing. So with all that being said, I think Vince Williams is the one guy who, when you talk about you go into a playoff series and teams say, hey, we're going to try to make that fifth starter be exposed and make them do some things off the dribble or whatever the case may be. Vince Williams can, dump a bounce pass off to Zach Edey if you put him in that position and comfortably do so. He's done so in the past, not to Zach Edey in particular, but to some of the other teammates. And then real quick, I'll get to GG Jackson. It's simple for me. You've heard me say this a bunch of times, Joe. He's one of the few guys on the roster that can say, I'm about to go get us a bucket, get out of my way. That's what you need in the playoffs. It sounds simple, but a lot of guys can't do that. Jaren Jackson Jr. can do it. We've seen him do it a bunch of times this season. And when you get to the playoffs and when teams say, hey, we're going to switch everything, when teams, this Grizzlies unorthodox style of offense, teams are starting to, realize some of the things that they're doing. We've seen Draymond Green talk about it as of late. We've seen JJ Redick talk about it. We saw Doug Christie talk about it when I was in Sacramento. Coaches and players are starting to realize some of the things that the Grizzlies are doing. So the Grizzlies are going to have to start to develop counters in the process of that. And when you get to the playoffs, you talk about what that's going to look like. You need guys when things break down, when teams have you figured out, so to speak. You need guys you can just give the ball to, and they got a one-on-one matchup they can just take advantage of, and they can turn it into an advantageous situation. Ja Morant can do it. Jaren Jackson Jr. can do it. Dez can do it in stretches. He has his moves. He doesn't grade out as above, league average in isolation scoring, but that is still someone who is capable. And beyond those three, who's the fourth guy? To me, it's GG Jackson. He's the other guy in the playoff series who you can trust in those situations. So you'll need him to be at his best. You'll need him to continue to develop. You'll need Vince Williams Jr. to continue to develop as a three-point shooter, as a playmaker, as a point of attack defender. If you get all those three things from Vince Williams, if you get that efficient shot creator from G.G. Jackson, then you have the makings of a championship team where you got two guys who can come in and help you in areas where you have not been great to this point of the season.
Couldn't have said it any better myself. At this stage, it kind of goes back to what we saw this team being at the beginning of the season, right? John Morant, Desmond Bane, Vince Williams Jr., Jaren Jackson Jr., and Zach Edey as your starters. I asked for G.G. Jackson as the sixth-man bucket getter off the bench. We're on the same page, Damichael, as we normally are. Let Damichael and I know in the comments. Hit us up on X, at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax. How do you feel about where this team is at? Vince Williams Jr., Zach Edey, and G.G. Jackson hold the key to that. And that's one of the reasons this trade deadline is so fascinating. We're not going to get a large sample size with those guys together before Memphis has to decide whether or not this team is for real in that way. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, closing out today's show, previewing a big one, big fight feel in Memphis on Thursday night. Grizzlies Rockets. We'll talk about it next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Ultimate College Basketball HC. It's a brand new mobile game that I'm really excited about. If you've ever dreamed of being a college basketball head coach, this is your chance to step into those shoes. In Ultimate College Basketball HC, you control every detail of your program, recruiting players, hiring coaching staff, overseeing training camps, handling NIL deals, managing scholarships, and so much more. It's all in your hands. And when it comes to game time, you get to draw up offensive plays. You get to set strategy. That way, you won't just affect your current season. You will be shaping the future of your school's basketball program. It's a game that lets you feel the full weight of what it means to be a head coach and lead your team to glory. Here's a special offer for Locked On NBA listeners. Use promo code LOCKEDONCBB, Locked On CBB, all caps, inside the game store to get a free boost for your program. It's the perfect way to kickstart your coaching career. To download Ultimate College Basketball HC, just visit ultimate-cbb.com or look it up in the app stores. Ultimate College Basketball HC, begin your coaching legacy today. As I mentioned a moment ago, Damichael, big fight feel in Memphis, Tennessee, Memphis Grizzlies, Houston Rockets, two of the teams in the second tier, right? We talked about that a moment ago. OKC, Cleveland, Boston, that's probably the top tier of the NBA. The Grizzlies in the second tier. Houston certainly has a claim to that as well. The Grizzlies have seen the Rockets before this season, did not go particularly well for Memphis. The teams are different now. How does this fit into your mind with what Memphis is capable of being at home, hopefully, potentially, having guys like Ja Morant, Santi Aldama, Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane? The cavalry feels like it might be coming at a good time. This is a big game for the Grizzlies.
This is a big game. This is a measuring stick game. You say it has a big fight feel to it, and I think there's a physicality part of this game that's going to be huge. Look, the last couple times I went down to Houston, and I went back and listened to some of the things that Taylor Jenkins and the players said about the game. Sounds eerily similar. Both times they talked about the fact that Houston was the more physical team, and that's not a surprise if you've been watching Houston play basketball this season. There ain't a lot of things that are flashy about those boys over there. They embody what their head coach truly is. Ime Udoka is a guy who preaches, toughness, physicality. He's not. You've seen him a couple times this year get into it with players, with referees. He doesn't back down. When Amen Thompson chunked Tyler Hero to the ground, he said, "Hey, it's just one guy stronger than the other." He wasn't saying this guy should have done that. So it's just, this is a tough team. And what have I talked about a lot, Joe? And I think we talked about it too. These are the type of teams you're going to see in the playoffs. Not exactly, not even specifically Houston, but teams that the Grizzlies have struggled with in the past. Dallas, the Lakers. Those teams who have a certain brand of physicality, the Clippers fit that mold too, that they play playoff style basketball and they mug the game up. It's going to be dirty when you play them. This is one of those teams, and you watch that, go back to game 2 of the season when the Grizzlies played the Rockets. They were neck and neck first 2 quarters, and the Rockets just continued to wear on them. And one thing that stood out to me in that game, and this is one of my biggest keys in this game, Joe, one thing that stood out was talking to the players after the game, particularly Ja and Des. They both said, man, in that third quarter, when the game started to get away, they started to get into some of the old habits. And what they mean by that is when the game gets, muddy a little bit, and when they're not able to get in their pace as much, because when you play teams like this that are really good on defense, that's what they're going to do to you. But in that case, when the game gets that way, the Grizzlies get in some of those old ways where Dez will just say, "Hey, give me a screen," and they'll run pick and roll, and it looks like the old Grizzlies offense basically. And I remember coming into the season, that was one of my things. Like, okay, when adversity hits, are they still going to be able to trust this new offense? Are they still going to say, okay, let's have our emotion. Let's continue to do some of the things that we've kind of prioritized. So that's what I want to see in this game. I want to see if the Grizzlies can stick to their principles against a tough Houston Rockets team.
Be really important for them. There's no denying that. Sticking true to who they are. The standard is the standard, right? Your Taylor Jenkins talk about that all the time, especially early tenure with Memphis. The standard is the standard is the standard. So how do you maintain that standard? Part of that standard has to be defense, right? And the Grizzlies in recent games have struggled on the perimeter. Any team can look like the peak Golden State Warriors if you allow for them to shoot threes at the level that some of the teams like Sacramento and others have done of late. That's a major piece of this for me, partner. How can the Grizzlies force the Rockets to beat them in ways that don't involve the three ball?
Yeah, for sure. I think when I look at Houston, I see a team that, like Memphis, they aren't the greatest, shooting team in the world. But they both of these teams are going to play really good defense. But this is a different looking Houston team, as well. Like they don't have Jabari. Jabari Smith is out right now. So without Jabari Smith, they've inserted Amen Thompson into the lineup. And if you've been seeing Amen Thompson play of late, I mean, Steven Adams basically said that he hasn't seen anyone like him before, from an athleticism standpoint. And many of you know that Steven Adams played with Ja Morant, but Steven Adams has also played with Zion Williamson. Steven Adams has also played with prime Russell Westbrook, one of the most explosive point guards to ever play the game as well. So it's noteworthy to hear Steven Adams say that, because he's a really good basketball mind. And when he says things, I don't think he's just saying them out of thin air. Someone who's talked to Steven Adams over a couple years straight, I know that he's a real good basketball mind. But yeah, I think this is going to be a battle of two great defenses and kind of who can impose their will. I'm telling you, this game, all I'm going to be looking for is how much can the Grizzlies stick to their principles on the offensive end, because this is the big picture question. Right? When they play teams like the Clippers, when they play teams like the Mavs, when they play teams like the Rockets, when they play teams like the Thunder, it's going to come down to the big picture question is, can this offense work in the playoffs? We see the regular season success, top 5 offense in the regular season right now. Can it translate to the postseason? We won't know the real answer until the playoffs, but the best example of if this offense can work in the regular season is against teams like the Houston Rockets.
Regular season basketball can have that vibe. The NBA Cup tries to tell you that's not possible, but I'm here to tell you this could be a playoff feel in Memphis tonight. Make sure you're checking out Grizzlies Rockets. Damichael Cole will be there front and center, covering not just for the commercial appeal in his role as Memphis Grizzlies beat writer, but he'll be there as part of the dynamic duo that is Locked On Grizzlies. Thank you so much for being with us on this episode of Locked On Grizzlies. On our next episode, Damichael, I'll be flying solo post-game Grizzlies Rockets. Lots of interesting things to come out of that contest, I am sure. Maybe a chance to take a look at the standings, see who the 2 and who the 3 is in the Western Conference heading into another busy weekend of NBA basketball.
Yeah, definitely going to be a good time for you to kind of evaluate where the Rockets and the Grizzlies are after that game, because they'll play again too. They got another game coming up after that, and we'll be back, for that one as well, in addition to the game against the Timberwolves. But yeah, this Rockets Grizzlies game, no other way around it. Like, it's just good measuring stick game. Like, I think if you go back to that second game of the season, Jaren wasn't playing yet, so this will be Jaren's first time playing against them. They'll be without Jabari Smith, but I dare someone in Houston to use that as an excuse, because you can't tell me that Amin Thompson has not been an upgrade in that lineup. I mean, the guy's averaging 11 boards, and I think his last 3 games, like 18, 19, 20 points. Like I don't know if Jabari Smith's getting that starting spot back.
Thompson is really fun to watch. If you haven't watched Thompson play yet, I have him on my fantasy basketball team. And I kind of knew that he was going to be good when I drafted him. I'll be honest, I didn't know he'd be this good. He's a lot of fun to watch. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. Make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure you're subscribing to our free daily newsletter. Go to lockdowndaily.com, click on the Grizzlies tab, and get words from me, NBA overall words, fantasy basketball words, all sorts of great locked on content. Locked On Grizzlies newsletter. It is free. It is daily. LockedOnDaily.com. For Damichael Cole, I am Joe Mullinax. Stay locked in. Enjoy Grizzlies Rockets. It is going to be a wonderful game. Hopefully, it's not a blowout. That's not as much fun to talk about on a Friday. Either way, I'll see you there.